All right, you guys, welcome to another installment of this series of inspirational keto stories. Fat Adapted Athlete here, and today I've got a special guest, JoAnn. Good evening.
Hi.
This is actually our second time. Our first time I had some computer issues, so we worked through those, and it was a great interview, but we still have JoAnn to grace us for a second time. So for those of you who don't know, JoAnn is a fellow moderator on the Ketogains site on Facebook. And she's also involved in several other keto groups, which we'll talk about more later. She's an admin on one or two other sites as well. So anyways, before we get into all that, JoAnn, for those that don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're currently living, where you're from, and so forth?
Sure. I was born in southern Minnesota, and I lived for a while in Nevada growing up. Actually, we moved back and forth a couple different times. And I currently live in Ely, Minnesota, which is about, I don't know, 2 hours away from the Canadian border, so we're pretty far north. I have two boys, one 14 and one 16, and they're both in sports year-round. They're just winding up the football season, getting ready to start up the hockey season. Our high school football team right now is undefeated. Last year they went to states, or the year before they went to state. So we're looking at maybe possibly having that happen again this year. Um, we have a farm here. I have 5 horses. My husband is a self-employed logger. He's always been self-employed. They have a family business, him and his two brothers and his dad. So we're almost done building a house. We've been building a house for almost 8 years. We've done it all ourselves. So we're just...
And you had mentioned before that you have a couple of businesses too, right?
Yeah, I train horses, and then I also trim them. So I do more of a natural approach with both. I don't put horseshoes on. I don't believe in them. And I use a very, it's called natural horsemanship when I train.
Gotcha. And I have a list of questions, so I'm a little bit more organized this time. So that's kind of what I'm browsing through here to find all this. So what are your interests? Do you have any hobbies besides horses?
Yep, I like to quilt. I haven't done it in a long time, but I do enjoy that. I'm an avid reader. I just kind of throw myself at everything I'm interested in. And if anybody was paying attention on the group earlier, I just got 2 new books. Well, I have the ebooks, but I collect books, so I got the actual physical books in the mail today. So that's always exciting.
Yeah, I'm a reader too, and I like to have books on my phone to read when I'm in a spot and I want to continue where I left off. But there's something about a hardbound book, an actual paper in your hands. There's just something about that.
Yeah, that, and I collect books. I like to see them all up on the shelf and look at it, and can't do that with them in a digital copy. But if they are nice for uh, reference, or if you're going to use them, in an article or something, because it's really easy to access, especially in my case, because I don't have a lot of, I have a computer at home here, but it's not on the internet at all. So a lot of the stuff that I do is 90% of what I do is all on my phone. So it's easier then to access it than typing it out on my phone.
So they do have internet in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Okay, well, JoAnn, we're obviously talking about in this series. It's kind of an inspirational stories about those that are having success with ketogenic diet. And I want to do this because I feel like there's a lot of people who are having success, and there's a lot of people that are kind of in the limelight of keto that I don't think have the results that some of the people that I personally come across. And I wanted to just share their stories and tips and success and so forth. So maybe you can just kind of take us through your history with some of your weight gain and your weight loss. And for those that don't know, we'll talk a little bit about where JoAnn's at now and I think it's funny when you talk about quilting because I always see you with a barbell on your back and you're doing the heavy lifting. I can't imagine you quilting. It's funny, but we'll get into that. And I'm going to throw up some pictures here of JoAnn and some of her before and some of her after pictures as we get into this. But what's your history with weight gain and loss? Maybe kind of take us through that. How'd you get to keto and where you're at now?
Sure. You know, growing up, I was always thinner. I mean, not overly skinny like some girls I see walking around now. I can't believe there's nothing there's nothing there, but I wasn't overweight at all. I wasn't overweight until after I had my second child. I actually lost all of my baby weight from my first child. And but I was a single mother with my first child, so I think that made a difference. I wasn't and I was working 12 days straight out of every 14. And so there was not a lot of sit-down meals. It was a lot of, you know, on-the-go stuff, small. I would eat at the restaurant a lot, but it was healthy stuff. Like I'd have salads, and so it wasn't a lot of junk food. And then I got married and settled down, and my husband loves, you know, like roast and potatoes and loves pies and cakes, and I love to bake. So bigger meals, sitting down, and then I got a job at a convenience store where I still work, which can make for some hard days, but I'm surrounded by junk food. And so I just got in this really bad habit of eating junk food. And after my second child, it just all kind of caught up to me. I suppose age and everything, and my metabolism wasn't keeping up. And it was like all of a sudden I turned around and I was, you know, 180 pounds, and I was like, what happened? And I wasn't happy. I didn't like myself. And I initially tried the South Beach diet. And I did it for probably like, I want to say a month and a half, like 6 weeks. I lost 20 pounds initially. I wasn't ready for the commitment. And I didn't really have, like my family wasn't ready for the change either. They weren't ready to get rid of, you know, all the crap out of the house. They weren't. So there was too much temptation. It was too overwhelming. I eventually quit, gained the 20 pounds I lost, plus another 10 pounds. So that put me at 190. And I was disgusted enough with it that I didn't even try again for over a year. I still wasn't happy with myself, but I thought this losing weight stuff it's too hard. I'm just not going to do it. And then I saw a program that's called Take Shape for Life, and it's a severe caloric restricted diet, about 800 to 1,000 calories. You have, I think you eat 6 times a day. 5 of those are meal replacement, and then the last meal they call it a lean and green, and it's just lean protein and, you know, a vegetable. And I kind of like checked into it, and then I just let it go because the food was kind of expensive, and you bought like a month's worth of meal replacements at a time. And then they have coaches that you can buy your food through. And this lady ended up calling me, and that was enough. And then I got started doing that, and I did it for probably 3 solid months before I started going in a different direction. And I lost a lot of weight, but I was miserable. The food was awful. It was so little that you were always hungry, and it was like you would get this little bit of food, and you were never satisfied. And you would just be counting, like they literally have an alarm every 2 hours, because you're supposed to eat every 2 hours. And it was like, oh, I can eat, you know, eat this little bar or this little thing of soup. And it was like, okay, well, it kind of took the edge off. And then you would be waiting for, you know, the next two hours to eat again. Expensive. But that's where I first got exposed to ketosis, simply because of the caloric restriction. because I was still, you know, averaging, I could have up to 100 grams of carbs, and it was 100 grams of protein and low fat, very low fat. And so just from the sheer caloric restriction and the deficit I was in ketosis. And there's a forum there, and you chat with people, and they have all this information. And so I was reading all this, trying to keep myself occupied because I was hungry. And so then I had to go read more about ketosis, and the direction that I found myself going, I eventually weaned myself off of their meals and into a low-carb, high-fat type of eating. At first, it was very much structured the same. So I was still eating every like 2 to 3, maybe 4 hours, and but the meals were different. So I was dropping the carbs lower, and it kind of upped my fat. And then the more I got away from it, the more, the actually bigger my meals got, and the fewer times a day I was eating. Probably settled right around 1,200 calories a day. I started out in Take Shape for Life with, it was a higher protein, 100 grams of carbs a day. Unfortunately, as I first transitioned into low carb, high fat, I got into the really high fat and the low protein. So I ended up dropping my protein down to like 60 grams a day because, of course, you know, like all the newbies, and this is one of the reasons that I kind of try to discourage people from doing the ketone testing and the blood glucose testing, because it can really derail you away from just eating like you should. My blood sugar, which I'd never been to the doctor for, but when I started testing it, it was coming in at over 120. And I was like, how do I get this down lower? Well, you lower protein, right? Yeah, okay. So that's what I did. And I completely stopped losing weight. I was eating, 1,200 calories a day, and I wasn't losing any weight. Probably 80% of that was fat. My protein was super low. Carbs were super low. And I was like, what is, and I couldn't figure it out. And then there's the old low carb, high fat group, which kind of doesn't exist anymore. And in that group, I ran into a wonderful man, Raymond. He runs the OKL, Optimal Ketogenic Living site. And he convinced me to raise my protein up. And I did. I actually kind of flip-flopped the fat and the protein. So I went back to a higher protein diet and a lower fat diet. I was still probably 35% body fat at this point. And it worked really well. Weight loss started right in again. And I used, at one point, I think I was up to like 170 grams protein and probably around 60 grams of fat. I was losing weight, and I was still ketogenic. My blood sugar, I kind of quit testing it for a while because it was high. I kind of took a supplement for a month. It's called Glucosolve, which acts very similar as metformin, but it's an over-the-counter supplement. But it was expensive, and I ran out. As long as I was taking it, it kept my blood sugars in the 70s. But you're supposed to take it with food, and I was moving closer and closer to a 1 or 2 meal, intermittent fasting style of eating. And you were supposed to take it, can't remember if it was 2 or 3 times a day, but with a meal. And I was like, well, if I'm not eating, can I take it without eating? And eventually I ran out, and I just didn't order anymore. But I don't worry about it. My ketones were over 2, and I was like, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm losing weight. I don't care. And then everybody kept telling me, well, I was losing weight, but my protein was higher than most people, and higher, at that point, it's still higher than a lot of people eat. And I, out of curiosity, I'm like, well, I'm going to go back and test and just see what's going on. Well, lo and behold, my blood sugars had dropped right down on their own to 70s and 80s. And I wasn't my ketones were lower, but I felt great. I was still losing, and I lost that weight all the way down to 143 pounds was the lowest I got. So at that point, it was roughly a 50-pound loss. And then I decided I didn't, want to be skinny. I wanted to be healthy and strong. And so then that is when I started on the path of lifting weights. And so I started doing that, and a guy I ran into online gave me a program, and I did that for, probably about 5 months. Kind of tweaked it here and there. I started out with squats and deadlifts, and I got really frustrated because the form was bad, and I was just like, this sucks, and I quit doing them. Was doing everything else, though, and worked really hard. And then and that's about 5 months. And then I started training with Menno for show, and that was about 5 months, and that's pretty much right up to where I am now.
Okay. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about some of the things you mentioned. But you are active in several keto groups. I was wondering if you can tell us which ones you're in, where they can find you. I know that JoAnn is one of the most active people in the Ketogains group. You can see her every day, I promise you. But what other groups are you in? And then what are some of the challenges you find most common among women? We could say men too, but while I have a woman here that I'm interviewing, I'd kind of like to focus on that. What are some of the main challenges you see with women over and over? Now, guys, I'll tell you, JoAnn is very, very knowledgeable about a ketogenic diet and a lot of things about health and nutrition, and can guide you in the right direction. So while we have her, what do you say, JoAnn? What groups are you in, and what are some of the biggest challenges you see a lot of women that you're constantly addressing?
Sure. Well, I am in Ketogains, obviously, an admin in there, and then I'm also an admin in Ketogenic Dieters. And that group focuses more on probably beginners and people that have, 25 to 40+% body fat. And some of the reoccurring themes, and it's the same thing that I went through, is women, whether on their own, because they just have this idea in their head that they shouldn't be eating a lot of protein, or if they eat a lot of protein, it's gonna somehow make them, gain all this muscle overnight or whatever. They're eating way too low protein. They have no appetites. Their hair is falling out. They're eating all this fat, and sometimes they're losing weight. Sometimes they're not losing weight, and eventually they do stall out. And it's just they need to not be afraid to eat, roughly 80 to 120 grams is the average, depending on what kind of lean body mass they have. But 60 grams is way too low. And I've seen some come in with like 40 grams of protein a day. And it's just awful. And they just, and so that's an issue. And eating all the calories. And then the other ones are they eat they figure as long as they keep their ratio correct, 70-80% fat, 15% protein, like 5% carbs. As long as they keep this magic ratio, they can eat as much food as they want, because somehow all the fat just magically makes them lose weight no matter what. And it doesn't happen. Of course, if you're 100 pounds or 200 pounds overweight, like 50% body fat, eating this way, you're probably cutting out all the junk, and you're naturally going to lose weight for a while until you don't lose weight anymore. So Those are probably the biggest, and that protein doesn't turn into chocolate cake.
Yeah, a lot of people are afraid protein is going to kick them out of keto. I think a lot of women are afraid to eat protein in general just because our society's kind of programmed these skinny cardio bunnies out there, and that's how you get in shape, that's how you lose weight, and this is the ideal thing. And I think protein is often associated with bodybuilders. You think of bodybuilders eating protein and drinking protein shakes, and most women would never think of like drinking a protein shake. Because again, like you said, they're kind of afraid that they're going to wake up one day as the She-Hulk. And I think you had mentioned this in our last interview that it's hard enough for men to gain muscle. Like, ladies, we're trying to pack on muscle, and it's hard for us. So it's going to be even more difficult for you to accidentally do that.
Yeah, nobody accidentally puts on muscle if it was only that easy. And there's kind of a misconception about how well women can put on muscle. I mean, when you look at it as a percent-wise, women can build 100% of the muscle men can build. But men start out with more muscle and they start out with more strength. But when you look at the percentage of the lean body mass that a woman start with, they build exactly the same percentage of muscle, provided they're trying to do so. And it's hard work for anybody, and nobody just wakes up one day and goes, "Oh my God, what happened? I have all this muscle." It just doesn't happen. So I think it's somewhere in the middle between the two misconceptions. One is that they're afraid if they do anything, they're just going to magically turn into this big Hulk, or that they can't gain muscle because they're a woman. So I think it's kind of in the middle of those two misconceptions.
Yeah, and it's funny though, because sometimes when people do start lifting and they put on 5-6 pounds, they go, "Oh well, I'm lifting, so it's probably all muscle." And the reality, on the other hand, is that you can put on I'll link an article by La McDonald about the rate of muscle accumulation. I think it's like a pound a month for a male. So if you put on 5-6 pounds in a month, it's not all muscle. I promise you. It's something else. Could be water, could be a little bit of fat, but it's not all muscle. So anyways, I've kind of hear both ends, and that's probably more from guys too. But anyhow, okay. So the protein myth. So ladies, don't be afraid to eat protein. You're not going to wake up one day as the She-Hulk. I know at Ketogains, can you kind of tell what the formula that we use at Ketogains?
Sure. Protein is clean, and that should always come first, and it's based on lean body mass. So you're looking at a minimum 0.8 grams per pound lean body mass up to like 1.2 grams per pound lean body mass. And if you're fairly lean already, you could go off total body weight, and then you're probably going to look at like 0.82 grams per pound body weight in protein.
Okay. Since we mentioned lifting, and we kind of touched on this just a little bit, you're into lifting, and a lot of times you lift heavy. Now, guys, JoAnn is lean and muscular, fit. She's not a big, bulky bodybuilder, but she's fit, and hopefully you've seen that from the pictures that I threw up on the screen there earlier. But this is kind of in contradiction to a lot of things we see. I see a lot of ladies like on Instagram and these other places, and they're doing the beach body and the jumping around and lots of activity and no lifting, and you're kind of doing the opposite. Isn't that gonna make you look manly? How much cardio are you doing?
Well, for the first 5 or 6 months I started lifting, I did absolutely no cardio whatsoever. Unless, I was doing a lot of supersetting and like pyramid sets, so it was continuous lifting. There was not a lot of breaks taken in there. So, depending on how much of that you consider towards a type of cardio, but it was heavy. I mean, if I had a set of 12, there was no way that I was making 14 reps. So the weight that I was lifting for the rep ranges I was doing, I was lifting as heavy as I could just to finish the sets. And then even the first part of the time I was working with Menno, there was no cardio, and he's not necessarily fond of cardio himself, because he feels that it can interfere with strength training. So if your focus is on building muscle and building strength, if you have too much cardio in with that, it can you won't be able to get the optimal gains on the strength side because your body doesn't know which way it needs to go. It can only kind of focus on optimally one thing. But then as we got closer to competition, he added, because he didn't want to drop my calories below a certain point either. So there was a point where we needed to add it, but it only got up to, at the most, it was 50 minutes a week hill walking. That's a week. So that's like, if you're doing it 7 days, that's less than 10 minutes a day.
Well, what about for women out there that, maybe they don't lift? If they lift weights, are they going to look big and bulky and manly like a guy? What are your thoughts on that?
No, and there's different ways to lift, and lifting heavy is all about strength gain more so than hypertrophy. I mean, your muscles are going to get bigger as you use them, but lifting heavy and gaining strength isn't the same as focusing on a program to build just mass. And women, women are still women. So when I say that they have 100% the same, muscle building potential as a man, they're still a woman. So you're going to still look like a woman. And you're still going to have, you're going to look, you're going to have your curves. And it's also different, straight out of the gym and all pumped up and your muscles all pumped up. You look different than you do when you get up in the morning and get ready and clothes on and go to work too. So that's something I don't think people realize. And also they have, competitors, like figure competitors or physique competitors. When they see them on stage, you realize that their body fat percentage is, really super low. You're looking at 10 to 15% body fat, and on a woman that is really low, and dry. They're dehydrated, and that's not what they look like in the off season. I mean, they probably gain, 10 to 20 pounds because, for one, it's not healthy to be that lean all the time, and they're going to look totally different. They're not going to look so hard. They're going to get a lot of the curves back. So part of was how much fat is the person carrying, over the top of their muscle.
Yeah, I think at most ladies, at most you're going to have an athletic look, and that's really more what's in now versus the skinny anorexic, models. I think most men that I know and talk to, that's just a much more healthy perception. So you mentioned Menno there. So just to clarify what she's talking about, so Menno Henselman runs Bayesian Bodybuilding, and he's a statistician, so he takes kind of very calculated approaches with things. And you trained under Menno because you were training for a figure competition, and you decided not to do the figure competition just due to some different things. But I was wondering, since you actually went through that process of training for the figure competition that you were just talking about, where you get to kind of the lower levels of body fat and so forth, what are some of the biggest things you learned out of that experience?
Well, Well, coming into it, already having been losing weight for a good year and a half, the deficit part of it, and I disciplined, so I've already been, prepping meals and going off a meal plan, and so that part of it didn't really change at all, except instead of me coming up with my macros, I had somebody else giving them to me. That was the biggest difference there, because I still was planning my own meals. I mean, I could get feedback and ask, I'm having this issue, and Menno would give me suggestions, but I was still coming up with what I was eating for the most part. The biggest thing that I really enjoyed out of it was having somebody to get feedback from, and somebody to tell me what I needed to do if a lift was, if I was plateaued or not progressing like I should. Because up to that point, I mean, Brian was wonderful. It was wonderful that he gave me that programming, and he didn't have to do that, and he didn't charge me. He just said, here you go, here's something to get you started. But I was pretty much, on my own, and I didn't know anything. I mean, there's still a lot that I don't know, and so I just was kind of doing it. I mean, I was working really hard, there's no doubt, but I didn't, if something stalled, I just kind of intuitively went about it, because I didn't know the actual tools there are out there. So being exposed, when we started the program, it was a combination of the lifts were either like linear progressive or they were rep range progressive. And then as we got further along and I was trying to cut more, well, when you're in a bigger your deficit and the more body fat you lose, you lose strength with that. Well, the idea is to keep, you don't want to lose muscle going into the competition. The whole point is to have, muscular. So then I was exposed to like undulating periodization and all these other, more advanced tools. And that part of it was really interesting and really helped me out. Now I feel like I have a base that even if I had to go research stuff on my own, I feel like I have somewhere to start from. Because before, it was almost overwhelming. I didn't even look into things, because every time I did it, it was just, there was all this information, and I didn't know one, person out there from the next. I didn't know who was good and who wasn't, who to listen to, and so I just kind of didn't even look. Now I feel like I at least have enough of a handle on stuff that if I wanted to go get more information on my own, that I could do that in a relatively productive manner.
That's awesome, and I obviously believe in coaching and think it's a great thing. I wanted to mention too a couple things. Number one, you mentioned meal prepping. And I know that you put together a little ebook about meal prepping, and you have a blog. I think it's bluejeanwellness.com, and that's also your Instagram handle, Blue Jean Wellness. So I really encourage you guys all to go over to Instagram, follow her at Blue Jean Wellness. But can you tell us a little bit about your blog and about the meal prep book and how it might benefit somebody?
Sure. The blog started as a way for me to document my journey from where I was to the stage. And then as my plans there kind of changed, I'm looking at a show now in the spring that's a little bit closer and it's a little bit more low key, and I think it'll probably work better for me to start out. But so that's where that started from. And I do also have some articles that I've written over the course of time in the last year, well, even that more than that, the last year and not quite a year and a half, that I've been involved with these adminning these groups. I've written, a handful of articles. all those I've republished on my blog as well, because I find it easier to link to that than to try to dig up threads in the group and, you know. So I have that, and then I do have a page on Facebook too that correlates with my blog, and I just try to, you know, I put out stuff, videos of me, and not necessarily because I ever think that I have, you know, this perfect form, because I don't. I'm a beginner. I haven't even, you know, I've been lifting for about 13 months. But for me, it's more about motivating other people, because they see me doing it, or, you know, see somebody else doing it, or another woman doing it, and it gets them to think that they are more capable, and it makes them want to try it and want to do it. So anything that I have out there, it's never because, you know, I think I'm this great example necessarily what to follow. It's just all about motivation. And I like to, if I find some articles and stuff that I think are great, you know, I post a lot of Menno stuff, and like starting strength stuff and stuff that I find relative, I'll put on my page.
Okay, JoAnn, so you also have an ebook about the meal planning, and you, from what I understand, you break down like the macros and calories into different meals, or you're teaching something. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So what I've run into is, you know, in the group, because as admins, you know, none of us are getting paid. So we aren't offering people the same level of support that you would get if you were paying, you know, a coach. So it's like, okay, here's this chart. You either find your height, or you're, you know, and you're just given this set of macros. And some people, they get, okay, so for the whole day, I get to eat this much fat, this many carbs, and this much protein. But they're overwhelmed. They don't even know where to start with that, how to break it down, what that means, you know, how much food that is. And so what the book basically does is it goes through, and it actually can be used by anybody. It's not even keto specific the way it's set up. I mean, all the examples I use are examples of my own meal plan. So those are, you know, keto, but it could be utilized by anybody. It assumes you have a daily set of macros, that you know what your protein and carb and fat amounts are. And it starts out with the basic, just like a basic, you know, meal split. I use 3, but you could do 2 or 4, or however many meals you want to eat. It shows you how to break them down. And then once you get that down, it goes into a couple different more advanced ways to plan your meals. There's one like a circadian rhythm set up where your breakfast is your biggest meal, and then as you go through the day, they get smaller, so your last meal is your smallest meal. And then there's a section in there on calorie cycling. So, because at one point I calorie cycled, and I had 3 different levels. So depending on the intensity of my workout, or if it was a rest day, you know, I had a low calorie, a medium calorie, and a high calorie day, which is probably similar in your, you know, more traditional bodybuilding literature, except the carb cycling. In the way I have it set up, and if you're going to be, you know, ketogenic, it would be actually fat cycling. Just, you know, some days you're eating more than others. And then in the back of the book, there's, and actually, you know, the book is $4.99, and even if you don't use any of that other stuff, there's a wonderful food resource in the back that gives the fat, carbs, and protein of a whole bunch of vegetables, you know, a bunch of protein, and a handful of healthy fats.
Okay, awesome. So if they want to find you, they can find you on Ketogenic Dieters, Ketogains, BlueJeanWellness.com, and also on Instagram, BlueJeanWellness. JoAnn, I want to thank you for being on today. Is there anything else that comes to mind about keto that you want to address or throw out there?
I can't think of anything.
I know that's kind of an off-the-cuff question there. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this interview with JoAnn. Like I said, if you want to find out some more information or contact her, you can reach her on Ketogains, or where's the best way to reach you? Do you have an email?
I'm probably in Ketogains the most, or just through my own Facebook page, or Facebook is probably the easiest way. I'm on there daily, so.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're gonna close it out, guys. We're gonna close it out with a flex. And until next time, keep it keto, my friends.